Nigel Farage Show on LBC.
So the Prime Minister, she's unashamed. She's going to spend the foreign aid budget so that it benefits UK interests. She's going to make sure that foreign aid works. So it's a big, strong speech down in Cape Town today from Theresa May. She's good at getting up and giving these big, strong speeches. The question is, do her words reassure you that it's right, given what she said today, to stick to £13 billion a year on the foreign aid budget? And if you think, yep, absolutely, she's reassured me, let's keep spending the money, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think, do you know what, this is ridiculous. We know we're going to finish up spending it on a whole host of ludicrous and pretty uncheckable things. If that's how you feel, text to 84850. Or maybe you're one of those who thinks, forget what the other countries do. I know we spend more than America, more than almost the whole of Europe, but actually we have a moral obligation to spend this money. And if that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Let's go to Simon in Hornchurch. Simon, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. I want our money to be spent on British national interests, so I'd like that 13 billion spent on improving the policing in this country, or helping education so that schools aren't asking parents to pay for books and everything else, etc. I'd like it to be spent on the potholes in our roads and improving our infrastructure so that our economy is stronger than it is. Mrs May represents the truth just as much in this subject as she does on Brexit. It's incredible. And notice me in her speech, she doesn't actually say that the majority of British people agree with this. She just hopes that they would go along with it.
Do you know, Simon, David Cameron, when he was asked about his period as Prime Minister, and of course he left rather abruptly after that shock referendum result, David Cameron said that one of his greatest achievements as Prime Minister was to get us to spend the 0.7% every year. And my sense of this has always been that your view, Simon, is the majority view. People do want money spent in their own interests. However, when it comes to earthquakes, when it comes to devastating hurricanes, I don't think people mind giving money for emergency relief. In fact, I'm perfectly happy to send a cheque, pay online myself. But Simon, she shifted the policy here. She's arguing that the money won't get spent on stupidities. She's arguing, Simon, that she'll spend this money and that ultimately it will benefit British companies and British workers. Do you not believe her?
Well, as you probably gather, I don't know. I mean, I suspect I wouldn't trust Mrs May on this, as I say, than any other issue. I mean, the government at the moment is a joke. As I say, why would I spend my money down the road if I want to benefit my family? I spend it on them to improve their lives. Primarily, if we want to improve conditions around the world, let's trade freely with the rest of the world. As we know, that is the whole point behind Brexit. That's mutually beneficial to all countries. We're not undermining their economies that way. We're actually benefiting their economies and benefiting our own. But in terms of
trade, not aid,
but by the taxpayer, primarily that should be spent here on the needs. It's not as if we don't have these needs. People can dismiss that as much as they like, but there are people in need in this country, and they should be the prime responsibility of this government.
No, Simon, you've made that argument very, very clearly indeed. Let's see what Harry in Waltham Cross makes of this. Good evening, Harry.
Good evening, Nigel.
So, are you reassured by the Prime Minister that the foreign aid budget's going to be radically transformed and in future will be spent in ways that will benefit us?
All I can say is that pigs might fly.
Right.
This idea that foreign aid benefits the UK economy is rubbish. If you go back a few years, as I understand it, we were giving India £500 million a year in aid. Whether they wanted it or not, they keep saying they don't want it, but we give it to them anyway. And going back a few years, they wanted to replace their aging fighters, so they were looking round to purchase new. And it was a straight competition between the new British Typhoon fighter and the French Spatial. So what do? They bought French.
So it hasn't helped, doesn't? No, I see that. I mean, Harry, are you saying that you don't believe the Prime Minister when she gives these big speeches?
You could say that. You could say
Right.
that.
Okay. All right. A very, very cynical Harry there from Waltham Cross. And look, I'm sure we're going to get people on saying that we have a moral obligation to do this, but I do suspect there is a very big majority in this country very upset with the amount of money we're spending on foreign aid, with the way we're spending it on foreign aid, and just won't believe that this is the Prime Minister to radically shake up the system. I most certainly don't. Do I think it's important when she talked about post-Brexit being able to do trade deals with African countries? Absolutely I do. Trouble is, because of her transition period, it'll be at least 2021 before we can sign any of these things. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 7:15. So we're going to go on. We're going to go on spending £13 billion a year. In fact, folks, the truth is it'll be £14 billion this year. So we're going to go on spending £14 billion a year in foreign aid. The Prime Minister will keep us to this international target, which almost nobody apart from us actually meets. But she reassures us in Cape Town today that it's all going to be absolutely hunky-dory, because in future we won't be wasting money on African equivalents of the Spice Girls. We'll actually be spending it on projects that in the end will benefit us, and she's unashamed about that. One other issue in South Africa today that I wondered whether she would talk about, and it is what is known as land reform. Cyril Ramaphosa, he is, of course, the South African president. He said not long ago, there is no land grab. There is no assault on the private ownership of property. Our proposals will not erode property rights, but will instead ensure that the rights of all South Africans, and not just those who currently own land, are strengthened. Okay, so you know what's been going on. Farms have been taken from people. Far too many South African farmers, yes, white farmers in most cases, but in some cases they're farmhands too, have been murdered through these expropriations. It is awful. And last week, Donald Trump intervened in this. He said, I have asked Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to closely study the South African land and farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. South African government is seizing land from white farmers. That was Trump last week. That was Trump on the 23rd of August saying there is a huge problem here. And I wondered, what would Theresa May do? What would she say in the face of this very, very, and it seemed to be controversial issue? Well, what we heard today was Britain supports South Africa's land reform programme, provided it is carried out legally, is what she said in Cape Town today, adding she would discuss the issue with President Ramaphosa. The UK has for some time now supported land reform that is legal, that is transparent, and is generated through a democratic process. Mrs. May, it is not legal, it is not done through a transparent process, it is absolute theft, and I'm afraid with it, the lives of many South African farmers disappearing. I would have thought perhaps today you might have done rather better than that. Or would it seem awkward? Would it seem embarrassing to speak up in favour of white people? I guess that's what it's all about. But once again, on a foreign policy issue, whether it's Iran or in this case the land grabs going on in South Africa, we take a position as a country that is diametrically opposed to that taken by Donald Trump. You may think that's a good thing, you may think it's a bad thing, but hey, it's very, very real. Susie is a brand new caller from Hemel Hempstead. Susie, are you reassured by Prime Minister May's words today? It's Mary, is it?
Not Susie.
Okay, well, sorry. Mary, good evening.
Oh, good evening. I'm afraid that they say you can tell they're lying when you see their lips are moving. I don't believe a word this woman says, and I'm really wondering if she's losing her marbles a bit, really, because she's so stupid. I just can't believe that she's a leader. Look at the
Mary,
money we give to Zimbabwe. They've done the same thing there, and there they were a flourishing economy. Now they're broken. Yep. And she's virtually going to encourage South Africa to do the same.
She can't be stupid, Mary. She can't be stupid. I mean, come on. You know, she's been elected as an MP. She's held senior office. She can't be stupid, but she may be very out of her depth.
Well, I just don't know. I just think she's like Tony Blair. She's just in a different world to everybody else. I just think the woman's losing her marbles. I really do. I just can't believe she's so out of touch. She has all these advisors. How can she? I just am almost lost words. I don't know what to say about the woman.
Well, Mary, it could well be that her advisors are even more part of the metropolitan London bubble than even she is. Maybe they're even more out of touch than everybody else. Mary, I thank you. Well, not one of you so far. Not one of you coming through and saying you think the Prime Minister has given a great speech today. I really am surprised. But you can contact me, 03456060973. She also today visited a school where there was dancing going on, and she joined in with this dancing, and I'm afraid that the satirists and the cartoonists are going to remind her of that every single day between now and the end of her premiership. She was also asked her up-to-date views on Brexit, but more of that in a few moments. Let's stick with her speech on foreign aid and whether you think it's still worth spending £14 billion a year, given her reassurances today. Paul says to me by text, no. Food banks, the NHS, housing, new schools. We need one house to be built every 5 seconds. May is out of touch. Sean from Kensington says, another example of Mother Teresa's international PC virtue signalling when there are more deserving causes here at home. Surely someone out there will speak for the Prime Minister. Maybe it's Andy in Holyhead, I don't know. Andy, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel, and welcome back to the Brexit fray. Good to see you back in that.
Yes, well, I'll be out there, Andy, don't worry. And one of the things I will argue is that the government and our political class are completely out of touch with public opinion. That's a point I will make when I'm out on tour. And Andy, I think it applies to the foreign aid budget as well.
Foreign aid is a touchy subject. It serves two purposes. The primary purpose that most people think of is like things like hospitals and wells and education and sort of wishy-washy, touchy-feely, nice things. The secondary aim, I think, is what's driving this. South Africa is a largely English-speaking country, and it is also in a frighteningly prominent position geographically wise, and it dominates that channel between the Antarctic and the passageway through from the southern Atlantic to the southern Pacific. And I think that is what's driving this more than anything else.
Well, yes. I mean, I have to say, Andy, I think increasingly that the foreign aid budget has been used as an instrument of foreign policy, as part of our soft global power, I suppose. If that's the case, why not be honest about it and just rename it the bribery budget? Well, that's what she's saying, isn't it?
People don't think like that, though, do they? People like to see the butterflies, and they don't like to think of the grubs digging holes in the ground underneath it, living in the muck that make the butterflies come from.
Yeah, no, I do understand that, Andy. So, do you think if it was properly executed, this could be quite a smart move?
Well, I actually think we should be blatant about it and just say straight up front, listen, we don't give foreign aid because we really care whether they die of typhoid or not, or whether they can read or write or not, or whether they've got shoes. We give foreign aid because we get something out of it.
Well, she did say she was...
People will then start to accept it, I think. It's the same
she did say she was unashamed today, didn't she? But do you... Okay, no, Andy, I get the argument. I understand the argument. But do you think that this is the Prime Minister to reform the whole system?
Sorry?
Do you think this is the Prime Minister who will bring those reforms into place, stop wasting our money on India and elsewhere, and do the job properly?
No, I don't.
No.
Theresa May, she made a very good speech today, but she is actually quite a good orator, and she does have a habit of making quite good speeches. The problem is, she doesn't actually put them into effect on the ground.
No. Actually, Andy, she does the opposite in many cases. Andy, thank you for your point of view. Craig in Stockport says, hi, Nigel. Voted Brexit. I'm your biggest fan. But we can easily afford the 0.7%. It's just no problem. Well, okay, listen, man, I tell you what, Craig, we can't afford it. Many people think we can't afford it. And if you add up what we've been giving to the European Union, net, not gross, net, and what we're giving, you know, to the foreign aid budget, you know, you're looking here at over £30 million every day. You know, 1 week of that, you could build a new hospital. That's an argument that does persuade many people. But Andy was saying, hey, don't worry. Actually, we don't care about foreign aid. We're just using it to bribe foreign companies and governments, and it'll be in our economic interest. Well, if Andy's right, you know, but then, of course, he goes on to say she's not the right person to do it. If he is right, then they should come clean. Gordon is calling from the Netherlands. Hi, Gordon.
Good evening, Nigel, once again. We meet again
Good
on
evening.
the radio. I'd just like to say that Theresa May's dad dancing today, how embarrassing for the UK, for one thing.
It wasn't good, was it? No.
No, she looked like she was absolute. She looked like Barnier when he was hammered, drunk as a skunk, trying to dance.
No. Hang on, Gordon. We've never seen Monsieur Barnier the worse for wear in public. We've rarely not seen Mr. Juncker after lunch, not the worst. It must have been Mr. Juncker. Because that's pretty much a day. Because that's a daily event. You know?
He did have to have Prime Minister Rutte sort of like supporting under his arm, and I think, yeah.
I know.
We won't be drink driving because we're paying for his chauffeur-driven car. But no, as it goes for African countries, a lot of these African countries are not poor. A lot of people seem to forget the concept of the mineral rights that they've got there. They sell such as uranium, tin, diamonds, gold, etc. So these countries aren't poor. What she has to tackle is the corruption within the government itself. If you look at a lot of these governments, the big fat cats on the top and the people are starving. As it goes for foreign aid, we shouldn't be giving no more foreign aid, inclusive Saudi Arabia. But we're signed up to the Barcelona Agreement, which nobody seems to want to read or take heed to, that puts in foreign aid in a retrospective of we have to give. Now, okay, you get these disasters, you get starvation, you get Bob Geldof standing on a stage and everything, but you don't see him turn up for the murder and the rape of the white South African farmers and the slaughter of all the farm workers. You don't see anything of that.
You know, Gordon, I was hoping she'd have the courage to tackle that today. She did the opposite and effectively backed the Ramaphosa regime on this, which I think was a disgrace. Gordon, I thank you. Phil from Thurrock says, I just wish the foreign aid concept, except disaster aid, could be called what it is, a trade development grant. A bit of a consensus building around that. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's now 7:30. Well, a big speech from Theresa May down in Cape Town today. Very few of you seem to believe that actually she's going to make any radical changes to the foreign aid budget at all. Others saying, do you know what? Actually, if she did do what she said, that might be okay, because it may actually be in the interests of our country. But why call it foreign aid when it appears it's going to be used, perhaps, for something different? And a big day for LBC as they announce changes starting on the 1st of September, particularly to the afternoon and evening schedules. So from 4 to 6 p.m. every day, it's going to be Eddie Mair, who comes to LBC after 20 years presenting Radio 4's PM programme. My times are going to change. They're putting me on at 6 o'clock. I'll be on from 6 till 7, and from 7 till 10, it's going to be Ian Dale, and then from 10 till 1 a.m., it's going to be Tom Swarbrick. So quite a different look to LBC, and clearly Eddie Mair, very experienced broadcaster, really, I think, a very big plus for this station, which I think is still going places. Now, a lot of you say to me, you're so cruel to the Prime Minister on your show. Why can't you be nicer about Mrs. May? Well, the answer is that, frankly, I think she's dealing with the whole Brexit thing in a fraudulent manner. You know, Brexit was an instruction from the public to turn around the ship of state by 180 degrees. You can't do that unless you believe in it. She was a Remainer, and I think she remains a Remainer. I mean, listen to Theresa May speaking in Cape Town today to Sky News' Lewis Goodall.
Could you just honestly, in a very straightforward way now, tell me that given that we now know what Chequers would look like, we know what no deal would look like, given we now know essentially what Brexit will look like either way, would you vote for Brexit now?
What I'm working for?
Would you vote for Brexit now?
That is a hypothetical question.
Indeed.
And I don't answer hypothetical questions because we're not in the business of having, and it's very important, this point, because we're not in the business of having a second referendum on Brexit. We're not in the business of having a second referendum on Brexit. What we're in the business of doing is delivering Brexit. So actually, what somebody would vote for today is not the issue. The issue is, are we doing what the British people wanted? The answer is yes, this government is delivering.
Millions of young people out there, many of whom, as you know, are very anti-Brexit. They're going to be living with the consequences of your decisions long after you have left office and long after your cabinet has left office. Don't you owe it to the British people to honestly just say, very straightforwardly, whether you think that you would actually approve of Brexit? Now we know what Brexit would look like in the event of another referendum.
Well, of course, the negotiations are ongoing. We've put forward our proposal. The negotiations are ongoing.
Because we've got to live with it.
The negotiations are ongoing. We've put forward our proposal for a good deal for the future. We prepare for every eventuality, for every outcome. But what we're delivering on is the vote that the British people took.
You don't think it's a very good idea, do you?
Parliament overwhelmingly gave the decision to the British people. The British people have decided to leave the European Union, and the government will deliver that. And the government will do more than that. We will make a success of it, because there are huge opportunities for us outside the European Union.
Brexit is a very good idea?
That's partly what. I think there are huge opportunities for the European Union, for the UK outside the European Union.
It's just painful, isn't it? Why can't she say, when she's asked 4 times, would you vote for Brexit now? Why can't she say, yes, because we're going to become an independent country. We're going to get back our democracy, our self-respect, our pride. We're going to make our own laws, put regulations in place appropriate to our businesses, our industries, have new relationships all over the world. Gosh, we'll even catch our own fish in our own waters. It's going to be a liberation for our great nation, a renaissance for Britain. Why can't she say that? No, she just limply goes on explaining we're implementing the will of the British people. And the reason she cannot answer that question, whether it's asked by Sky News' Lewis Woodall, whether it's asked by LBC's Ian Dale, the reason she can't answer the question is, in some ways to her credit, she doesn't like to lie. She finds it difficult to lie. The vicar's daughter tries not to openly lie, so she just avoids it. But it tells you we have a Remainer Prime Minister in charge of an overwhelmingly Remainer cabinet, and they all sit in a Remainer House of Commons, and they don't respect, genuinely, the result we got back on June the 23rd, 2016. But back to her today, her speech. She is going to radically reform the way we use and spend the foreign aid budget. Do you agree with her? Do you think it's right? Are you confident that we go on spending £14 billion this year on foreign aid? Because I am not convinced that she, apart from giving the good speech, that she ever delivers anything, whether it's as Home Secretary or Prime Minister. Andrew in Wimbledon, what do you make of all of this?
Well, I think she's doing the right thing, because you guys are going to leave the EU, right?
Yep.
And we're going to actually be looking for business all over the world, or trade all over the world. So if you don't have the sweetness to give these countries that are now trading with China and the United States, they will just tell you to get lost. You see, the mistake that the Brexiters are making is that they think we're living in 1960s or 1940s planet. You understand me? The thing that has changed now, African countries are going to China to trade with them. They're going to the United States. They're trading with other nations. They're not trading with Britain. You think you're going to use the British Army to actually force them to actually trade with you?
Oh, no, Andrew, no, that isn't going to happen. But your point's a good one. This is the first time, I mean, for example, on this 3-day visit, she's going to Kenya. It'll be the first time in 30 years a British Prime Minister has been to Kenya. And yet, as you say, the Chinese government and big Chinese businesses are in Africa every single week building those relationships. And I do get the logic, Andrew, absolutely, of what you say. But why call it the foreign aid budget? Why not be more honest? Why not call it the Overseas Business Development Grant? Something like that.
Okay, it's appropriate to be called the foreign aid budget because apart from helping to get British firms to be able to do business in those nations, you also have to have grants that you can give even some of the local economy, local people in the economy there, so as to make their infrastructure okay for the investment that British companies are bringing into those nations. I just want to say one thing about the South African situation related to the land and farmers, white farmers.
Please do.
The white farmers, I'm so sorry to say, between the 1600s and the 1800s and the late 1800s, forcibly took that land from Africans. So, I mean, for people to now say that, what's going on with
Andrew, we
from them.
Hang on. We cannot go back to the 1600s. We cannot go back to all the things that happened in our past. If we did, the United States of America basically would hardly exist. The world was what it was. But right now, I mean, Andrew, let me put this to you. You know, look at countries like Uganda. Look at countries like Zimbabwe. Look at the phenomenal agricultural food production those countries had, and look at what's happened to them now, particularly in the case of Zimbabwe. You know, those farmers in South Africa, you know, are doing a good job for the country. I know there may be historic wrongs there, Andrew, but frankly, stealing land from them, and so many of them and their workers getting killed, surely that must outrage you, Andrew.
But can I just say one thing? The case of the white farmers, some of them are in places like Nigeria, for instance, and they've been emphatically made to understand that that land doesn't belong to you. So you can do the agriculture you want to do, but the land doesn't belong to you. So I think what's going to happen is that, yes, they might tell them to stay, but you have to make it clear to them that it's tribally, right? Those lands belong to some certain tribes, and it was forcibly taken away from them.
And what if those tribes in the 1600s forcibly took the land off other tribes? How do we deal with that, Andrew?
Excuse me?
I'm saying, supposing some of the tribes forcibly took that land off the previous owners, how would you deal with... I mean, how far back in history do we go with this?
No. This situation was a situation whereby the land was given to missionaries, right? But at the back of that, it was forcibly taken also at the same time. It was out of trust that African tribes gave some of those land to them. Out of trust. No,
but isn't the truth, Andrew? But Andrew, isn't the truth now? Isn't the truth now that these farms are being forcibly taken off these families, many of whom are finishing up dead? Right? Okay, fine. If that's what you believe, that's fine. I have to say, what evidence I've seen suggests otherwise. Andrew, I thank you very much. And I had a feeling that land reform would come back up, or land reform as it's called. It is a hugely contentious issue. Mrs May ducked it totally today. Back Ramaphosa, said, provided it's legal. Well, what's going on, folks, isn't legal. Tony by text says, Nigel, May is useless and 14 billion buys a lot of coppers and nurses. I think, Tony, particularly in London at the moment, where we've gone through 100 people murdered this year, a burglary, a robbery rate that is truly terrifying. I think, Tony, a lot of people living in Greater London, and there's, about 10 million of them, would very much agree that that is a big priority right at this moment in time. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive at LBC, and it's now 7:45. £14 billion a year we spend on foreign aid, 0.7% of GDP. We're just about the only country in the Western world that actually meets that target. David Cameron said it was one of the crowning achievements of his time as Prime Minister. Mrs May clearly agrees, but she does say there's going to be a shift, and unashamedly in future that budget will be spent in ways that will benefit longer-term British businesses. Well, if that's the case, Prime Minister, why call it foreign aid? And when you talked as Home Secretary about radically changing things in our prisons, with illegal immigration, you gave good speeches at party conference, but you never delivered. So I have little confidence in what she said today. That is my view. Joseph on Twitter says, 0.7% of our budget, is it really worth questioning? Unless the debate is to increase this, you're just creating alarm. Again, I'm not creating alarm, Joseph, but 14 billion quid a year is, maybe not to you, but to most people listening to this, it is a lot of money. And when they hear over the years how much of it's been spent, it makes them very angry. This is taxpayers' money, and people in the UK really do care about that. Dave in Brighton says the majority of the country voted for the Tories. It was a part of their manifesto, the same manifesto that ensures we leave the EU. Why can't you accept that foreign aid is what people want? Dave, I honestly believe that if we were spending this money on disaster relief, on one-offs, people would support the concept. We are actually, in terms of charity giving, we're a very, very generous country. The problem with so much of foreign aid, it is that cheque that goes every single year, and the feeling that in many cases what foreign aid is, it's effectively poor people in rich countries giving money to rich people in poor countries. I felt that way for about 20 years. Let's go to Steve, a new caller from Newham. Good evening, Steve.
Yes, hi, thanks very much. Yeah,
not one bit. So, are you happy with what she said today, Steve?
Well, I rang up. I haven't got any information about what Mrs. May said. I haven't heard about that. But with regards to the foreign aid budget being 0.7% of our GDP,
yeah,
I think the criticism earlier in the programme, everyone was thinking of, or the callers were thinking of 13 or 14 billion pounds, that being a lot of money. But the idea I want to just suggest or say is that if a person had £100 to spend to sort his budget out for the week, decide to give 70 pence away to a tramp or to whoever, he'd then have £99.30 to address the needs that he has for the week. And that's the situation with the foreign aid. 0.7% is like having £100 and giving away 70 pence. You've got the vast majority of it still left, and we should be happy to give at least that much. And if it's not well spent, then that's an issue to be addressed and have enough.
But Steve, if you with your £100 choose to give your 70 pence to a tramp, that's your choice. But the point here is it's not you effectively making that decision, it's the government. And there are some, Steve, who think that 70 pence is being taken from them, given to a tramp who spends the whole lot on booze and wants 70 pence again tomorrow. That's the problem with it. The problem is not
the illustration of a tramp, and I think that most people, if they had £100 in their hand, wouldn't mind giving 70 pence away. I think that's the fact.
Well, is it, Steve? Okay, and as I've said already, we are not, as a country, ungenerous, uncharitable people. Far, far from it. But Steve, do you understand why, when people see how much of this foreign aid has been spent, do you understand why people get so upset about it?
I beg your pardon, say that again, please.
I'm saying, when people see the ways in which some of this budget gets misspent, do you understand why some taxpayers get upset?
Yes, that's a different issue, and it shouldn't be misspent. And if for instance, you had the 14 billion, the 0.7%, to be spent in that fiscal year, if it wasn't spent, I'd be all for putting it into, like Norway has an aid budget, they just stow their savings in it. We should dedicate the 70 pence out of £100 every year, not necessarily spend it at all costs. If we don't spend it, then let's just put it in this equivalent of a sovereign aid. Development
Steve, that's fine.
People into actually finding good ways to spend it, and it'd actually be good for the country. It'd be looking out.
Steve, 2 years ago, 2 years ago, Steve, they found with a month to go, because of the rate of sterling, they were underspent. So they desperately spent $1 billion in the last month on almost anything they could. And I think that's crazy. Your point, that if you don't spend it all, put it somewhere safe, I would agree with Steve. I thank you. And Steve making a compassionate argument and saying it's not overall a huge sum of money, but it's still money. It's our money being spent by somebody else. Alan is calling from Hertfordshire. Alan, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
Are you brimful of confidence that this Prime Minister is going to radically transform the way we spend our foreign aid?
As for this Prime Minister, I think she's showing the worst judgment of a Prime Minister since 1938, when Chamberlain declared peace in our time. But
that's a bit strong, isn't it, Alan?
No, I think it's fair. Anyway, but on to more positive things. The Commonwealth, as a policy, says that they support trade, not aid. That was the policy that all the Commonwealth heads of government signed up to at the Commonwealth heads of government meeting. It's the policy that this government signed up to. So that shows the way to go. There are we can't solve all the poor countries' problems in the world, but I think we can do a jolly good job for the Commonwealth ones if we concentrate on them. And then perhaps, if that's the success I think it will be, other countries will see the way to go. I'll give you one little one little fact here. Sub-Saharan Africa, 8 out of 10 of the topmost innovative economies are Commonwealth member countries. So I reckon putting some money into them is putting money where it's going to do a lot of good.
But it depends how we do it, Alan, because countries that receive foreign aid officially find it very difficult because of their credit ratings to go out on the international markets and borrow money and finance big infrastructure projects, for argument's sake. And I heard a very passionate speech from the president of Ghana, given about 6 months ago, where he said to his own people, we've got to get ourselves off foreign aid. We've got to stop thinking of ourselves. We've got to stop thinking of ourselves as colonial victims of the past.
Exactly.
We've got to accept where we are and move on. And it really cheered me to hear that being said.
Yes,
Alan, absolutely, I agree with you totally. I've got time for one last caller on this subject. I'm going to go to Ali, who's calling from Hounslow. Good evening, Ali.
Good evening, Nigel Farage. Big fan of you. I called before a few months ago. Similar
I remember,
to this topic regarding NGO, and as I explained to you, I'm from Ethiopia as well as Somaliland, and I'm a regular traveller back to my continent in Africa. And as I explained to you, the vast sums of DFAD money, UK taxpayers' money, is spent on consultancy, so-called advisors. A big chunk of it has been eaten away by administration fees, and it creates an industry where there's vast swathes of hotels where they have holiday swimming pools, 4x4s, Land Cruisers, and it's surrounded by a sea of poverty, but yet there's companies who are begging for investment in basic infrastructure, transmission lines, roads. Give us access to UK and European markets by assisting our local authorities so that they can become competent authorities and meet the stringent criteria.
Do you, Ali, do you feel that foreign aid is almost corrupting in itself in terms of the influence it has?
Absolutely. And what is so surprising is, why hasn't Theresa May visited Ethiopia? Ethiopia, which is the fastest growing economy in Africa, one of the fastest growing economies in the world, growing with not dependent on commodity, creating a textile-based economy, exactly following the model of China, and it's one of the largest recipients of Chinese direct investment. Is she avoiding Ethiopia? Is she trying to ignore the truth?
Well, Ali, I think the truth of it is, for the last 30 years, British governments have willfully ignored the Commonwealth, willfully ignored large parts of Africa. They've kind of been obsessed with Europe, believing that is our future. And she's right to go to Africa, but not in terms of what she said today. Ali, I thank you. Look, my final thought on all of this is, I do believe in trade, not aid. I do believe in helping poor countries. I particularly believe in helping the family within the Commonwealth. But foreign aid is not the answer. And even branding this money as foreign aid actually has a damaging effect in many ways on those countries. If this is business investment, if they're joint ventures with private companies, fine, let's just call it that. But let's get the money away from the bureaucrats who've been running the foreign aid budget and running it so inefficiently for far too long, to the anger of very many taxpayers. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'm back tomorrow, back in London at 7. At 10 tonight, it's Nick Abbott. But up next, it's Clive Bull.
Nigel, thank you very much.